Alright folks, I'm back. I just don't know if my video camera is back, but I'm going to try this anyway. If not, I'm going to make this one. It's just a question of having to go out and buy another video camera. Anyway, I got back just in time to be able to see how totally unprepared and inept Ben Carson is as far as being the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. This man might have been one of the top pediatric neurosurgeons, and there is no doubt about his particular brilliance in that particular field. But as far as being able to run a federal agency with any type of expertise, this testimony, in my opinion, puts that particular issue to rest. There is no way in the world that this guy, there's no way in the world that this guy should have been given this particular agency. Now, if he had said Health and Human Services, I might have given more of a benefit of the doubt. But as far as housing, this man knows nothing whatsoever about housing and urban development, and his testimony, where he ducked and dodged every single question pretty much from the Democratic side, and he even basically sidestepped a few of the questions from the Republican side, just led me to believe that this guy basically is just a figurehead for whatever Donald Trump wants to do. Now, I'm going to play for you a couple of clips. One of the clips is from Maxine Waters, where she provides Mr. Carson with information regarding his the cuts that he's going to make or suggested to be made. And then Representative Al Green from Texas turns around and asks him, specifically about the amount of money that's going to be cut from several programs, which Maxine Waters had previously provided to him. And Ben Carson basically acted like a total idiot or asshole, and showed that he just didn't have the information. And then at the end of the testimony before Representative Green, he tries to take a little shot, and then the Republican comes in behind him in order to allow him to get his shot in without Mr. Green's an opportunity for Mr. Green to come back at him. So check this particular section out.
I appreciate having the time. I'm sitting here and I'm listening to how much you care about the most vulnerable in our society, and how you want to help people become independent and out of poverty, and yet your budget and what you are advocating for and what you're advocating against does not really define your representation that you care about these vulnerable people. You're cutting public housing by $2 billion, housing choice vouchers by $800 million, project-based rental assistance by $65 million. You have members on the opposite side of the aisle talking about programs that are funded by the Community Development Block Grant. They don't even know that you've completely eliminated that. The Home Investment Partnership Program, we talk about the national housing crisis that we have, and the National Housing Trust Fund is completely eliminated, and the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative eliminated. And, Section 811 housing for persons with disabilities, cut by $121 million. And so there's one thing that stands out in my mind based on the campaign and looking at what happened in the primaries and things that the president said and how he talked to you and others and demeaned you so much. But one of the things that stands out in my mind so vividly is how he mocked and mimicked a disabled journalist. And so you have, he has openly mocked disabled people And HUD's most recent budget proposal, which you supported and defended, proposes a steep 18% cut for Section 811 program, which is focused on serving low-income persons with disabilities, as well as harmful rent increases on Section 811 residents. This is very concerning in light of the critical role that HUD plays in providing housing assistance for low-income persons with disabilities, as well as enforcing the Fair Housing Act, which protects persons with disabilities against discrimination in the housing market. Do you remember seeing that display by the president where he mocked and mimicked disabled journalists? Do you remember seeing the site of that?
I remember seeing the episode that you're referring to.
Do you think it was wrong for the president to send that kind of message about what he cares about disabled people?
Well, I'm not really here to talk about the president. I really want to talk about the people that we're trying to help.
Well, yes, I want to talk about the people too. Right now, I want to talk about the disabled people. And I want to know if his attitude is such that it is reflected in this budget, and you defend the budget, and are you defending in any shape, form, or fashion the fact that the person who wanted to be the president of the United States of America for all people would treat disabled people that way? What do you think about that?
As a pediatric neurosurgeon, a large portion of my patients were disabled people.
All right, so you do care about disabled people, is that right?
Of course.
When you're in front of disabled people who are advocating for resources to help with their lives, and they ask you about the president and the fact that he mocked and mimicked disabled journalists during the campaign, and they ask you, do you defend the president in doing that? What did you say to them?
I would say that I'm going to use the resources and the talents that we have to look out for the interest of the disabled people. We're going to commit to making sure that
So do you think the cut of $121 million is a demonstration of your support for the disabled? Section 811 housing for persons who are disabled?
I would say it's not the amount of money, it's the result that you get that's
I
important.
beg your pardon, I can't hear you.
I would say it's not the amount of money, but rather the result that you achieve that's important.
Well, you keep talking about the amount of money, but your real concerns and what you care about is reflected in the budget. And it is difficult for me to believe that you really care about the disabled when you are cutting the resources to them because of the difficulty in their lives and the tremendous needs that they have. It is difficult for me to believe you care about them with these kind of cuts. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Now, if you notice, the chairman called her, well, now that I think about it, I think he's right, because the time originally belonged to a male member of the House, and he yielded it to Maxine Waters. But now, check out Al Green and the questions he asked, which relate directly to the information that Maxine Waters provided. Check this out.
The gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witness for appearing as well. Mr. Carson, Mr. Secretary, Dr. Carson. Sir, you have indicated that there will be substantial cuts to the budget that HUD has. Can you give me that dollar amount? I'm showing that it's about $6 billion. Is that correct?
That's about right.
Is that about 13% of the budget?
Yes.
And will these cuts, Mr. Carson, come from public housing, housing vouchers, community development block grants, and other aid to low-income persons?
They come from a variety of sources, including...
How much from public housing, Mr. Carson?
Probably in the neighborhood of, if you combine all the programs, 2 to 3 billion.
2 to 3 billion. How much from housing vouchers, Mr. Carson?
Rather than go through a quiz on all the numbers...
It's not a quiz, Mr. Carson. I have the time to ask you questions about things that you should have some knowledge of. If you have no knowledge of them, you can simply say so. I'll accept it as an answer. But this is something that's within your bailiwick, my dear sir. How much from housing vouchers?
Again, you know, I can give you that number, but
Well, if you would give it to me, I would greatly appreciate it, because I'd like to go on to community development block grants.
well,
Apparently he couldn't give the number because he was asked like 3 times for the particular number, and he ducked and dodged, and he's going to continue to duck and dodge with all of the questions as far as the financial numbers are concerned.
here's my point. I agree with you that it's difficult to do these things.
That has little to do with my question. You're answering a question that I'm not asking, to be quite candid with you. So would you kindly tell me how much HUD how much you're going to cut from the HUD budget as it relates to housing vouchers? Now, if you don't know, it's okay to say you don't know, Mr. Carson. I don't hold you to things that you don't know. How much are they going to?
Let's just move on and say that I don't want to offer a number because it's subject.
Why would the Secretary of HUD not give the number, the amount that you're cutting from housing vouchers, Mr. Carson?
Because
you're the Secretary of HUD.
Because
you're making the cut.
Because we've already talked about the total amount of the cuts.
Well, the total amount does not help me when it comes to the housing vouchers. I have people who use housing vouchers, and I need to be able to explain to them, Mr. Carson, how much the cut portends for them. How much, Mr. Carson?
Let's hear your number.
Well, Mr. Carson, forgive me for coughing while speaking.
Let's hear your number. He's not looking for Representative Green. We're not looking for Green's number. Green wasn't looking for his number. Green was looking for the number that Carson was supposed to be able to provide them with. But Ben Carson basically tried to turn the damn thing around on him.
But Mr. Carson, you're the witness testifying today. And if you want a moment to ask someone behind you, I would gladly accord you that moment.
I don't want to open the book and look at the numbers.
I see. So you choose not to say how much you're cutting from housing vouchers, or how much you're cutting from community block grants, Mr. Carson.
I want to talk about...
Mr. Carson, you don't get to talk about what you want to today. You get to talk about what I want you to talk about. You get to answer the questions that I pose, Mr. Carson.
Yeah, but I also get to answer the question the way I want.
Well, you can answer them the way you want, but if you want to show a lack of knowledge, you can do this. It's quite all right, Mr. Carson. So now, how much from community development block grants, Mr. Secretary?
Again, I'm not willing to sit there and...
So you don't know how much from community development block grants?
I'm not going to go through the list, this much, this much, and this much. I think that...
I'll move on, Mr. Carson. I accept your lack of knowledge. Now, Mr. Carson, there seems to be a belief among the ranks of those who have opportunities to help others, who have been blessed themselves. They seem to think that the rich need more, that the poor can do more with less, but the rich will have to have more to do more. Mr. Carson, if poor people could do more with less, there would be no poor people. Poor people are not poor because they choose to be. I know about your state of mind comment, but they're not poor because they choose to be poor. Have you not noticed, just for edification purposes, and I'm sure that you're aware of it, but there may be people who are listening who are not. Black unemployment, Mr. Carson, is always, with some exceptions, about twice that of white unemployment. There are many reasons for this, but that fact has a lot to do with what people can do with money that they have and what they can't do with the money that they don't have. There are other factors involved in this country other than a state of mind. There is still, Mr. Carson, invidious discrimination in the United States of America. While you may not suffer it, there are others who do. And they need to know what you plan to do, and I regret that you're unable to tell us today. I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
The positions that you ascribe to me are your opinion of what I think. They're not what I think.
See, now that's a bullshit comment, because the positions that are ascribed to Mr. Carson are the positions that he basically vocalized as far as poor people being poor because of their state of minds. And that's a crock of bullshit. all right? And I'm not even going to go into the third piece that I was going to show, where Representative Green doesn't get an opportunity to answer back to Carson because Carson was using one of the Republicans' time period, and Green couldn't get in there. But Ben Carson is a fucking idiot as far as housing and urban development is concerned. He doesn't give a damn for the people, and he's basically towing the line of a racist DJT who has demonstrated time and time again that he doesn't give a damn about people of color, and in particular black people, specifically in his attack on black women recently and in the past. So Ben Carson, you know, you're just a tool, and in my opinion, you're a super dull tool.